Sí. Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming to our last talk of this STEM week. We remind you to please remain quiet throughout the duration of the talk, out of respect for the speaker and of your fellow classmates here. For this final talk, we have Dr. Marco Tulio Angulo. He graduated from the Universidad Autónoma de Querétaro, UAC, in 2007 with a degree, which he then on went to get his master's in 2009, and his PhD in engineering in automatic controls at Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. From there, he went to Boston, Massachusetts, where he became a visiting research scholar and then a postdoctoral research associate at the Center for Complex Network Research. Lastly, he became a sponsored staff collaborator for Harvard Medical School at the Channing Division of Networking Medicine at Birkman and Women's Hospital in Boston. Dr. Angulo has 27 publications to his name in multiple journals and has given conferences at UNAM, MIT, Ohio State University, Princeton Harvard Medical School, UNAM Juriquilla, UAC, Universidad de Anáhuac, among many others. He is currently working as an associate investigator at the Instituto de Matemáticas, Unidad Juriquilla, and the main researcher of the PAPIT project, Mathematical Ecology, Theory and Applications to Sustainability. Dr. Angulo's work aims to answer fundamental questions from ecology and social sciences by developing advanced mathematical methods. Please welcome with a big round of applause, Dr. Angulo.
Hi, everyone. It's rather strange to speak in English in Mexico, but let me give it a try. So thanks a lot for the opportunity to be here. I want to speak a little bit about something that is close to everyone that was born in Mexico. Please raise your hand if you are Mexican. Raise your hand if you are Mexican. Okay. Then there are not many things that we as Mexicans agree. For example, please raise your hand if you voted for Morena in the last presidential election. Raise your hand if you voted for Xochitl for the last presidential election. Okay, so we might not agree on that, but there is one thing that all Mexicans agree. What do you think that can be? Tacos, and it's the main ingredient of tacos. That without that good ingredient, a taco is not good. And that is tortilla, right? Please raise your hand if you like tortillas. Raise your hand if you like elotes and esquites. Yes, right? So that is something that everyone agrees. But if you think about science and what are the important scientific questions of humanity right now, you might think of curing cancer, right? What other important scientific problem is there? Pollution, climate change, and so on, but you won't find maize there, right? You won't find tortillas there. Why? Isn't it important to have tortillas? Is it not as relevant as climate change? Sorry? Yes, indeed. And actually, growing corn or growing maize is one of the essential ingredients for feeding everyone, because maize is not only tortillas. Maize is important for at least for three different main reasons. One is food security, right? Maize is something very unique because you cannot compare maize with rice or with wheat, because rice and wheat need very specific environmental conditions to grow. And if you have lived here in Mexico long enough, you know that you can grow maize close to the ocean and also in the mountains of Querétaro in the Sierra, right? It can grow anywhere in the planet, right? And that is why it's so important. For example, I don't know if you know that in Africa, they eat a lot of maize because it needs a little bit of water and it can grow on very poor soils, right? And do you know that in China, they also grow a lot of maize, for example, right? It's not something that is restricted to Mexico. It's a very big contribution of Mexico to the world in some sense. And that's why it's so important for economic development. It's not just that you go to some small milpa. Do you know what is a milpa? Or that you go to these big plantations in the US where they have acres and acres of maize. It really can span the full range between very small land, in which it is important just for self-eating somehow, to very big corporations that they are only interested in profit, right? They, for example, sell maize as a biofuel, for example, and so on. And for us in Mexico, it has also a very important component that is cultural preservation. And that is something that is right now in the news. Like, what do you think about transgenic maize, for example, if it is good or not? And the reason why it's not a good idea to have transgenic maize here in Mexico is because we have hundreds of years of artificial selection in each of these different types of maize that we need to preserve because we don't know what can happen for the future, right? It's not that that we don't like the taste of hybrid maize. It's that we need to keep this fundamental information in place in circulation to allow for future changes that perhaps some of these grains will have the solution. So maize agriculture is really big. This is a plot that is showing you that in 30 years, maize agriculture has grown from a few localized places or countries in which it was important, like in Mexico or South America, into being a big industry. So what you are seeing here in this figure is in the horizontal axis how much you produce, and each color is a different country. So for example, you have, and in the vertical axis, you are seeing consumption, how much maize do you use per year. So above this diagonal line in the gray region are countries that consume more than what they produce, so they are consumers. And below that line are countries that sell maize, that they produce more than what they consume. And you can see two big superpowers in maize production. The United States, that it's not so unexpected, right? You have this golden belt in which there are like the optimal conditions for maize agriculture, and they can produce like 400 tons of million tons of maize per year. But for example, something that you might not expect is China, because you don't imagine in your head a Chinese people eating tortilla, right? It's rather strange. They use it more like for fuel production, for example, and it's very important. And you are seeing also some other countries like, for example, Africa and Brazil. And where is Mexico? Where is Mexico? So to see Mexico, you have to make a zoom in this small square. So each line is one country, and this open circle is what happened in 1990s. And as you move in time, you go to this trajectory until 2022. That is the latest information that is available right now. So where is Mexico? It's in a small rectangle here that I am showing you there, right? So Mexico, the original place of maize, is a big consumer of maize, right? Because you are in this gray region in which we consume more than what we produce, and it has not always been like that. If you look at the open symbols, like the open circles of all the countries, you see that in 1990s, what happened is that most of the countries aligned to this line. What it means is that they consume it as much as they produce. So it was kind of balanced. And then what happened? Trading and this idea of globalization, right? And then there was a question, do we really need to produce maize here in Mexico? Isn't it cheaper just to buy it from the US? And we were convinced that that was the solution. And we essentially closed our big factories of maize production, and we decided to import all the maize. But was that a really good decision, or how do you think about that? And the important aspect of maize agriculture is its consequences. Do you know what is the consequence of agriculture? One consequence is that we have tortillas. That is a good consequence, but there are also many other bad consequences. Here are 4. Yes? They use a lot of water. Yes, that is one important thing. And also they are going to pollute water, right? Because a fraction of the fertilizer or the herbicides that we use will filtrate until water. So that water will be not available for consumption anymore, right? So these are 4 important aspects. And essentially there are like 2 footprints of agriculture. One is the carbon footprint. That is how much CO2 you release to the atmosphere. That is very important for climate change, for example. And the other important footprint will be water footprint, right? How much water do we use to produce agriculture, and how much water do we pollute by agriculture, right? So the challenge is how do we need to continue expanding maize agriculture? And I want to see what do you think about these 3 options. The first option that I am going to present is how about we let farmers and the markets do as they please, that as it is happening essentially right now, right? So that is one way of expanding maize agriculture. This very likely will continue polluting our world until we can no longer breathe, we can no longer have water to drink, right? So that is option A. This is option B. Option B is let the government decide informed by partisan ideologies. Notice that this is a very crazy word because it's not it's not based on knowledge, but it's based on ideologies. Like if you are from pre-pan or something like that, perhaps you will tend to prefer to buy maize from the US because it's good in terms of cash, in terms of capital. But if you have a different ideology, like for example, you like better Morena, you will perhaps believe that it is better to produce maize here, self-sustaining production, right? But those are really equal. Both are beliefs, right? You might believe that the sun is made of hydrogen, or you might believe that the sun is made of light. It's belief, and in that sense, they are comparable. They are not, one is not better than the other. Is that clear to you? And this kind of mechanism, what has produced is something like this. For example, that the Mexican fields are essentially abandoned. If you go, how many of you have gone to the fields, to the campo, al campo cercano? And have you seen all the milpas that are produced? Usually they are worked by old people. Young people don't want to do agriculture, right? So essentially it's something that is going to die by natural death, because once people that essentially they are old, they are older than me, when they die, the fields will be abandoned completely, right? And that was, for example, one idea that this guy had, but it was just a belief that he believed that it was better to buy all our maize from the US because it was cheaper. He didn't care that a lot of people in Mexico were going to lose their way of life, essentially, right? Do you recognize this guy? Who is he? Who is him? Salinas, right? Like 5 presidents ago. And then we go to the other extreme, like in the last government with AMLO, he claimed that Mexico will be self-sustaining in maize agriculture. And at the end, it didn't happen. but they had these ideas like for 2024, Mexico will be self-sufficient, and we are somehow in that process. But it's again one ideology, right? We don't know who was really better. If it was better to buy to import maize by buying it in the US, or if it was better to produce it locally. Is that clear? So let me propose to you a third option, option C, that is let the government decide, but let it decide using scientific understanding of what is happening. So which of the three will you prefer? Please raise your hand if you think that A is better, B is better, C is better, right? That is something that most of us will agree, right? That C is the way to go. But the issue is that we, as scientists, have not done the homework, right? We focus a lot on curing cancer. For example, I focus a lot on studying the human microbiome to cure diseases. But for this essential question, not only for Mexico, but also for the world, there was no scientific understanding. And that is the meaning of colonization. We have to decolonize scientific understanding. Is that clear to you? The important open problems in the world are not just the problems that the US faced, right? They
like breast cancer. So I don't believe that saying that curing cancer is
no,
right? You can attend multiple.
No, I'm not saying that it is not important. I am not saying that. Of course, it's important to save lives, right? What I am saying that is not adequate is to think that the only important problems are those. Because there are important open problems here in our feet, right? So one of them is how do we produce maize, right? For example, we don't know how to optimally expand maize agriculture, guaranteeing that at least these two assumptions are made. First, that we feed everyone, and at the same time that we minimize the environmental impacts, right? That is kind of the minimal information that someone that is going to decide needs to know what to do, right? So our work is trying to address this gap. And what we did is to build a mathematical model of maize agriculture that was absent. If you look at all the literature in maize agriculture, you won't find a single predictive model of what to do with maize production at a global scale. That is colonization, right? And one word that I like is mathematics. Do you know why? Raise your hand if you like the word math. No one? 1, 2, 3. Okay, 4, 5. Very few people. And you know why? Do you know why math is important? Because it's a way to expand your cognitive capacity. Imagine the following thought experiment. What is a set of problems that you can solve just in your head without using pen and paper, just in your head? Imagine that is this big, right? The set of problems that you can solve just in your head. Now, I will give you a pen and a paper. How much is going to change in the set of problems that you can solve? Much, much bigger, right? Because you are expanding your cognitive capacity, right? You can write, think, you can do much more. You can store more information, right? You can consult books and so on, right? The same happens, but with steroids, with mathematics, right? It's a way to expand your ability to solve problems, right? If you don't know math, you can only solve this big of problems. But if you know a little bit of math, you not only are going to solve this kind of problems, you are going to solve much more problems. And if you are really proficient in math, you are going to be able to solve much more problems than a regular person just with pen and paper, right? So that is particularly true for complex problems. What I mean by complex problems, problems in which there are many variables that are involved, in which you cannot store all of them in your head. You need to store some of them somewhere. But where do you store information? You store information in your computer hard drive, for example, right? But you can also store that information in mathematical models, right? So those mathematical models, they kind of condense a lot of information in very few facts that can be quantified and that can be evaluated to see if they are true or not. Because what is the use of a mathematical model of any statement if it is false? What is the value of a false statement? What is the value of a false statement? Nothing. It's like the horns of a rabbit. Have you seen the horns of a rabbit? They have no value. They do not exist. That's the same with some statement that is false. With mathematical models, you not only produce statements, but you produce a statement that you can verify to see if they are true or not. Do you see the difference? So you avoid these horns of a rabbit. You are sure that you are not producing a rabbit with horns because you know it's false, right? So some important ingredient of mathematical models is data. For many years, we have had mathematical models. Essentially, since Galileo and let's say 400 years ago, we started to have models. But those models were very difficult to create because we have very few data. And right now, what we have is abundant data about everything, right? In particular, for example, we have 30 years of data of how each country in the world has produced and consumed maize and many more. For example, what is the area that a country uses for agriculture? What is the yield? That is the productivity, how many tons of maize you produce in 1 hectare, and things like that. And we have this knowledge for many regions in the world. And in particular, we focus on 10 of those regions that are the more active in some sense. For example, Mexico, the US, China, and so on. Okay, so that is one point of why mathematics is important. The other point where mathematics is important is because it allows you to quantify the impact. Because Salinas and AMLO can tell you that importing maize is good, but how good? Is it very good? Good in the middle? You're saying that importing maize is good is a vacuous statement. You cannot say anything really about it, right? If AMLO tells you, no, it's better to do self-sufficient production. Let's produce all the maize that we consume here in Mexico, and that is good. But in what sense is good? You cannot quantify it, right? So something that is relevant for mathematics is that you can quantify the impact of these decisions. So we will have numbers for what is the consequence of each decision. If I decide to produce maize here, it will have an impact that I can measure as tons of carbon, of CO2 released to the atmosphere, and millions of cubic meters of water that is consumed for agriculture, right? So decision goes into numbers. And I can tell you that this decision is better or worse than other decision using these numbers by comparing those numbers. Is that clear? Right? So with this, what we can do is actually to use mathematics to calculate exactly all the ways that a region can expand maize agriculture for the next 10 years, right? Not one way to expand agriculture, but exactly all the ways that you can expand agriculture. And what we find is that essentially things are white or black. There are no gray zones. The optimal paths are either to go for import, that is, you will buy all the maize that you want from the US, for example, in the case of Mexico, or the opposite, that you go completely to self-sufficiency, right? And there are no gray areas. We can prove mathematically that gray zones are not optimal, like medias tintas no son óptimas, right? So why is that important? Because I can tell you that my grandmother used to produce half of maize in his land, and the other half she buy it from the US and that was optimal. But we know that it is not true. You might believe that, but with mathematics, you can prove that something is not true. Do you see? It's not just a matter of argument. It's a matter of facts of mathematics. And you can prove that either import or self-sufficiency are optimal. Something in the middle is not. And actually, we can calculate where this transition from import to self-sufficiency happens, and happens for each country. And it turns out that it can be characterized by a single number that I will call lambda, that is particular for each country, and that tells you how many cubic meters of water are you willing to exchange for not releasing 1 ton of CO2 to the atmosphere. And again, we can prove mathematically where is this threshold. And we can even prove a mathematical theorem that, that shows you that this transition is discontinuous. So why is this important? Because how do I say it? Politicians are not very, most politicians are not very insightful, right? So let's keep them from them the power, right? The power to decide should be in scientific facts, not in beliefs, right? So let's get what is for Caesar, right? So give policymakers scientific tools to decide what to do. And yes, so essentially this is what I wanted to share with you. Now I will go rather quickly to some details of all this work, but essentially this is the main point. You should not trust politicians, right? You should not trust yourself. You should not trust anyone. If you can if you can have facts, right? And one way to have facts, what is a way to have facts? What is it? Sorry? Sorry? Proving, okay. And then how do you discard between different options? By belief, by throwing a coin, by asking God which one is the best one? No, you can do research in throwing coins and research on the Bible, for example. No. How you discriminate facts from beliefs? How do you discriminate between facts and beliefs? Someone has an idea? Science, right? The scientific method. If you see evidence that something is opposite to what you believe, you throw away your belief, you throw away your theory, regardless of how beautiful is it, right? That is the power of science. So give policymakers science to decide, not beliefs, not partisan ideologies, right? Okay. Okay, so I don't know how many minutes do I have? 25, okay. So let me show you some things that you can do with math. I will try to avoid all technical details as much as possible, just to show you some flavor of how this way of thinking works. So one way in which math is useful is that you can define precisely what you mean. And something that I want to define is what is the production path of a country. And this is a kind of work that you do in mathematics. You place definitions, so we all agree on what we are discussing. Otherwise, you can have a different definition of what is production, and we will discuss essentially different things, and we cannot agree. So something that is important in mathematics is to have definition of what are we saying. So this is the definition of a production path that I will denote by this letter P, and that will depend on time. This so the index T at a region of a time T consists of the following information of variables. The first one is that each country will have its harvested area. That is what is a land that it uses for maize agriculture, and millions of hectares. Each country will have, for a production part, it will have the average yield. That is how many tons of maize can you get in 1 hectare? And also, what is the inputs to the land that you use to have that productivity or that yield? And these are the two main ingredients that land need to produce. Essentially, you need fertilizers because at least in Mexico and in many parts of the world, the soil is really degraded. So it cannot produce anymore. So you need to artificially provide nutrients using fertilizers, for example. And the other thing that you need is pesticides because many types of plants are not adapted to deal with insects anymore because they were artificially selected. They cannot handle pests, for example. So you need to kill them using pesticides. And note that if you multiply how many hectares I am cultivating by the yield, you obtained actually how many tons of maize you produce, right? So the product of Y times A will give you how many tons of maize are you producing in a region. Okay. Then mathematics can help you to predict what will happen. Do you know this story of mathematics? So mathematics is also very useful to tell you contrafactuals. Is that a word for you? What will happen? Are you a fan of, for example, comics from comic books? Raise your hand if you read comic books. So there are some of these stories of what if. Are you familiar with those? What if this guy died when he was young? What if how things will change, right? So mathematics is precisely the tool to tell you what if. For example, what if I paid producers some price per ton of maize? What will happen with agriculture in that country? So each country, what we suppose is that it will set what is the price that to pay to producers per ton of maize product, of produced maize. And then we want to do a prediction in which we set, for example, 10 years in the future, what will happen. And we feed to the math what are the prices that we are going to pay on those 10 years. And we ask the math to tell us what will happen in that scenario. Give us a prediction of how the production path will be in those scenarios. Does it mean something? So essentially, the model looks like this in schematics. You have some, what we are going to feed the model, the mathematical model, is the price paid to producer per year. With those, we have some model of how landowners will choose how much fertilizer and pesticide to use in the land. With that, they will determine the average yield. With that, will determine the harvested area. That will actually depend, both of these things, on how pricey, what is the price of these two inputs, the fertilizer and the pesticide. If they are very expensive, people will tend to use less. If they are very cheap, people will tend to use more. And the other input to the model is what is the weather, what is the climate. And with that, you are ready to do predictions like this. So for example, this is what happens in Mexico. In the horizontal axis, you are seeing time from 1990 to 2020, right, in both cases. And you are seeing different colors. This red color means the historical data. That is the ground truth, the facts. For example, this is the average yield in Mexico for these 30 different years, and it goes like this in color. And we have also data about fertilizers. For example, in Mexico, they use like 75 kilograms per hectare to grow maize. This is the harvested area in Mexico. Again, the colors is the ground truth, the reality. And this is the pesticides that people use. And what you are seeing in black and in gray is what the mathematics predict that was going to happen under those same inputs. And what you can see is that the mathematics predicts very well what happens in Mexico. So it tracks the ground truth in color with this black line in prediction, right? And the model does not only do a good job, or mathematics is not only useful for Mexico, but it can be used to predict everywhere. Like what happens in Mexico, in the US, in China, European Union, and many other countries, right? So everywhere in the world, we can predict what will happen with maize agriculture using our model. And the model predicts well, and it has good properties in the sense that it quantifies correctly the uncertainty. And with that, we are ready to find what is the optimal path. If we have a machine that can tell us what will happen if we do something, then we can do this process like many times. I propose one set of prices, or how I'm going to pay for maize the next 10 years. And I ask the computer or the mathematics to tell me what will happen in that case. And with that will happen, I can calculate the impact in terms of two metrics, that is carbon impact, please don't look to the equations, and water impact, as I told you before. So carbon impact is how many tons of CO2 will you release to the atmosphere. That is bad for climate change. And the water impact, or the water footprint, is how many millions of cubic meters of water are you going to spend and pollute, in fact, for that effect, right? For each country. And the idea now is that you tell me what are the prices that you're going to pay for the next 10 years. I use my mathematics to tell you what is the production path that I should expect in the next 10 years. And then I can quantify what will be the impact in terms of carbon and water. Is that clear? And then let's explore what is optimal, right? And there are some details that I don't want to go, but essentially what you get is this kind of pictures that might be easier to interpret. So here you are seeing again actual data for Mexico, what is happening in Mexico. So in the horizontal axis, you are seeing what is the carbon footprint, how many tons of CO2 I will release to the atmosphere. And in the vertical axis, you are seeing the water footprint. What is a good point in this plane? A good point is one that is as close as possible to this corner. Do you agree with me? With low carbon footprint, with low water footprint. Do you agree? The problem is that you cannot get both. There is kind of a trade-off, that the region that you can actually realize is all this red region. That is, you can find some prices to pay that will put your country for the next 10 years in some point here, but never in the white region, right? So then what to do? Then what to do to find the optimal prices? Then you look kind of the boundary of what is possible. You get as close as possible to what is the optimal trade-off in water versus carbon. And you get to this frontier that it has a name. People call it the Pareto front. And that is important. Like, for example, you want to have a girlfriend, but you want to expend just as little as possible, right? There are two objectives, and you cannot get both at the same time, right? Do you agree with me? So there is some boundary of what is possible, and there is some points that are impossible to get, right? So the same happens, but for maize agriculture. There are some points here that you can get, other points that you cannot get, and there is one key parameter that will control everything, and that key parameter is this parameter lambda that I was telling you. That is how many CO2, how many tons of CO2 are you willing to exchange for, how many million cubic liters of water are you willing to exchange for not releasing 1 ton of CO2? Does it make sense? So how much water are you willing to expend just for not contaminating the air, essentially? And that is a number, lambda, that is unique for each country. And you can see, you can tune that parameter. That is essentially what the government should do, according to how much water do we have and what is our carbon footprint depth. They have to decide what is this number lambda. And in principle, it can go from 0 to infinity. And we don't know which value is actually the correct. But we can actually see what happens as we sweep across the whole range. And you get this solid line, depending on what is the value of lambda that you fix. For example, if you fix lambda equal to 0, what it means is that you only care for water. You are not willing to exchange even 1 milliliter of water for not releasing CO2. You are kind of in a very desperate situation regarding water. There is not a lot of water. And that will put you here, in which you have the maximum carbon footprint release, but the smallest water footprint release. Do you follow me? Then you can do the opposite. For example, I have a lot of water. I am willing to exchange water for not polluting the environment. So set lambda equal to infinity. You only care about not releasing CO2. And that will put you in this point here, in which you have the lowest carbon footprint, but the maximum water footprint. And as you move between infinity and 0, you draw this Pareto boundary. And those are all the decisions that a country can make. Those are all the optimal expansion paths that a country can choose depending on what is the value lambda that is actually happening in the country. Is that clear? And this can be done not only for Mexico, but for many other countries that are interesting, like, for example, Africa, in which water is really scarce, or China, in which they have a huge carbon footprint depth. And what you understand from this mathematics is this idea that I presented before, that the optimum is white or black, import or self-sufficiency. There is no middle ground. And let me show you how this works. In this figure, what you are seeing in the horizontal axis is time from 2020 to 2030, because I am going to do the prediction for 10 years in the future, starting from 2020. Yes, these are different axes. Just look at this figure first. So it will show you the production in Mexico versus time from 2010 to 2030. From 2010 to 2020, I have data, and this is the production that Mexico had. What Mexico consumed actually was above it. So it's this gray region in which that is above the production. Then we needed to import maize. Is that true? Is that obvious to you? That if this is the production, let's say 30 million tons of maize, and I will consume 50 tons of maize, the difference between the gray and the color is something that I will need to buy somewhere. From the US, I will import that quantity of maize. Is that clear? So the distance to the gray region is kind of how much are you importing. Then from 2020 to 2030 are the predictions of my model, of my mathematics, of what will happen in the optimal scenario in which, for example, I only care about carbon. I don't want to pollute the environment. I just care about that. And you are seeing different colors. This black line is what will happen with business as usual. Let's say if we continue the current trends of how we produce and consume maize, my model predicts essentially this, that we will continue importing maize from somewhere, let's say from the US, very likely. But if you want the optimal path that will only care about not releasing carbon, the optimal production is this color line. Do you see what it's doing? What it's doing is trying to go to the gray region as fast as possible. That is self-sufficiency, right? Producing as much as it consumes and nothing more, right? And that is what mathematics can show you. Look now what happens when you put lambda equal to 0. That is, you only care about water. You don't care if you pollute a lot the air. You only care about not spending water. So in this case, the optimal decision is essentially you won't go to self-sufficiency, so you will continue to import all this quantity of maize. And actually, In the last step, you will kill maize agriculture in Mexico because it's the optimal decision, right? So does it make sense to you? So producing maize here in Mexico will consume water. Is that obvious to you? Producing maize will consume water here. And if we want to keep all the water, the optimal decision is let's not produce anything, let's buy everything from outside. And actually, in the last step, I will just close maize agriculture in Mexico, right? So this parameter lambda, remember that is something that each country needs to set depending on how much water does it have and what is the historical carbon footprint it has, right? So this is one value that we have been exploring, that is lambda equal to 2.4, that is adequate for Mexico. So in this middle path, what you see is precisely what I told you, that middle ground is not optimal. So the optimal path is first to go to self-sufficiency as fast as possible, keep self-sufficiency as much as possible, and then at the end of the period, start to import some maize from the US, for example, right? But what it shows you is that you either import here or you are self-sufficient. It's never optimum to be, for example, in the middle, to produce 50% of what you are consuming. That is never optimal. It's either import everything or self-produce everything here. And there is some other technical details, what I will. So perhaps these slides, what will show you is that math is useful to say something like this that will be important for people that do decisions. So remember that what we want is to keep away the power from them. Just give them some scientific understanding of what is the problem. So how do you state something that is true under some specific conditions? Let me say it again. How do you state something that is true under some specific conditions? So mathematicians have solved that problem for you, and the name for that thing is a theorem. That is a statement that is true if the conditions of the theorem are satisfied. And this is what we will provide to the people that do the decisions, right? And the theorem can be written in many different levels of abstraction and detail. This is, for example, one that is kind of in the middle ground between mathematics and someone that does public decisions, let's say. And the idea is the following. Suppose that the carbon footprint that I will denote by C is a decreasing function of the prices P that I paid for maize. That is, as I pay more to the farmers, the carbon that they will release will decrease. And the water footprint has the opposite behavior. As I pay more to the people that to the landowners, the water consumption will increase, right? If I pay more for maize production, they will tend to produce more maize, and that will require more water, and then the water footprint will increase. So this water footprint as a function of the prices is an increasing function of how much I pay. No? And then the optimal transition, this value of lambda, for which below it's import is optimal, and above it, self-sufficiency is optimal, can be calculated by a very direct number that is written here. This will be the threshold. That is the water footprint at the maximum price that I can pay, minus the water footprint when I pay nothing, divided by the carbon footprint when I pay nothing, minus the carbon footprint when I pay the maximum that I can pay, Pmax. And that will tell you where is the threshold. Depending if you are below or above it, you will do differently in import or self-sufficiency, right? And you can calculate it. So just let me conclude with some general ideas. So the optimal expansion paths of maize agriculture are something like this. This is what you learn from the mathematics, and that you can explain to people, that you can explain to your grandmother, hopefully. If you only care about water, that is, the water footprint is your only priority, then the best option is to import maize. Why? Because you don't want to expend your water resources, right? So it's better to buy it from somewhere else. And you will do that by paying low, right? If you don't pay to the farmers, they will prefer to do something else. You won't have maize agriculture here in Mexico. If you only care about carbon, then the optimal decision is to produce locally. So if you care about climate change, the optimal decision is not to import maize from the US, because that will pollute a lot the world. It's better to do self-sufficient production. And for that, you will need to pay high prices to the farmers. And the transition from one import to the second self-sufficiency is discontinuous. There is no middle ground for optimality. You either do one or the other, and where is the boundary between one and the other is precisely at this lambda star that you can calculate using my formula. And you can also use this for other things that I won't get into details. And just to end, these are the people that have collaborated in this project. So I come from the UNAM. In the UNAM, we have this group, the Node for Multidisciplinary Applied Mathematics, that what it tries to do is to solve the problems of our time using mathematics. And we have different lines of research. One, for example, is the one that I do related to ecology and to sustainability, like this maize. And there are other lines, for example, Jorge Velasco is working on epidemiology. And essentially what they are trying to do is to do forecasting of what will happen with the next COVID. When we have the next epidemic, what we need to do. This work was also made in collaboration with Fernando Castaños. He's a mathematician that works in Investab. And perhaps the most interesting collaborator is Gilberto Herrera. He was a senator for Querétaro, for Morena. He's currently, I don't know how you say that in English. Él es un diputado por la zona del semidesierto en Querétaro, igual de Morena. And what is relevant is that the three of them have very strong scientific background. So even if he's a politician right now, he was trained as a scientist, so he can actually communicate in this class in this kind of ideas. And it will be very important because we don't want just to do science and do math just for fun, but we want to have kind of a real impact. And for that, the interaction between people that know kind of the science and the hard facts and people that are in charge of doing the decisions need to be permanent. So that is why we are trying to collaborate more and more with people of those regions. And finally, just to thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to try to answer any question if you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Okay, thank you. We have time for a couple of questions, everyone. So are there any questions?
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I think you propose a very important topic that some of us tend to ignore, that is the importance of our cultural identity of some species. I also kind of see it, I believe, with cacao, which is also of South America, and we're not even the main producers of it. And when we think of chocolate, we associate it with other parts of the world, like Swiss chocolate, or that is mainly produced in Africa. And my question was, if we did any genetic enhancements to maize, to the seed, will it be directly reflected in the production equations? Like, for example, we bred a maize to be to have a higher yield, to be able to cultivate in many different regions, or that needs some kind of less pesticides. Does that results will directly be seen in the yield, in all the factors that you mentioned in production equations?
Yes, there is a lot of research about that in bioengineering the genome of maize to make it more tolerant, for example, to droughts or to make it more resistant to pests. One important fact is that current maize without any genetic engineering is enough to get yields that are like 10 times what we are observing right now. So currently the world record of maize productivity is 20 tons per hectare. And do you know who won it? A Mexican, right? It was made in Jalisco. So currently Mexico is producing in average, like the yield or productivity is about 2.4 tons per hectare. See. So this is the productivity, right? So in 1990, the productivity was about 2 tons per hectare, and right now it's about 4 tons per hectare. And the record is 20 tons per hectare. It's actually more than 20 tons per hectare, just without any genetic modification, just by using better practices like how you plant the seeds, how you take care of everything, the soil, and so on. So that aspect is something interesting that people are doing to increase the range of situations in which you can feed people with maize. For example, in Africa, in which droughts are very extreme. But it's perhaps not something that should be the priority, in my opinion.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? We have time for one more question. Yes.
Hello, first of all, thank you very much. But I believe that the maize is very important for the Mexican. But how do you think that the maize can it affect the future economy?
The what?
The future economy.
Economy. So I don't know if you believe that a common economy requires that everyone eats, or is it possible to have economy without everyone?
Economy with the I don't know with impact with different factories. With the maize.
Like you mean using maize to produce biofuels or something like that? Okay. So right now that is a big part of the production. So these huge productions that you see in US and in China, for example, they are not eating that many corn. For example, in the US, you eat a little bit of corn, but not as much as in Mexico, actually. But you will use it for biofuels. So right now there is a huge industry for producing biofuels from maize, not for eating, just to produce biofuels. And that is also huge in China, for example, in which they don't have a large reserve of petroleum, let's say. So they are trying to go in that direction. So in that sense, for biofuel economy, maize agriculture will be huge. And actually, one country that is already doing that is Brazil. I don't know if you see that most of the country, in 1990, everyone was producing as much as they consumed. Then it came the globalization, and some countries go to the left or to the upper side, and the other countries were to the opposite side, to the bottom side, right? So all the countries that were that moved in this direction, what they mean is that they became consumers, and few of them moved to actually being producers. One of them is Brazil, that they are actually pushing. They also do not eat a lot of maize, of corn. They use it for biofuels, and they are pushing in that direction. One case that was very interesting also was, it's not here. Actually, I removed it. One other case that was interesting was Ukraine. Do you know about Ukraine? Before the war, Ukraine is very important because the soil is very rich, right? So they were heavily trying to become one of these large exporters of maize for Europe. But because currently Europe buys maize from Brazil, so you need to move all the grain from Brazil to Europe. That is very expensive. So it will be much cheaper just to move it from Ukraine to some other country in Europe. But now with the war, we don't know what will happen. But it will be a very important part of economy in the sense of biofuels. Probably in the same order of magnitude with other things like soybean agriculture for biofuels and stuff like that, or oil palms. And you can also do all this same analysis with other seed, like with wheat or with rice, whatever you want, you can do the same. Did I answer something? No? Okay. Yeah. Then tell me again what you asked. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. If you have any more questions, feel free to approach Dr. Tulio. Doctor, thank you so much for this amazing talk. Can we have another round of applause, please? On behalf of the STEM Week, the university, and our sponsors want to give you a little gift for being here. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here, guys. This was the last talk of our STEM Week. We hope to see you at 2:30 for the STEM Bowl finals. And please remember that if you have raffle tickets, they will be the raffle will be done at the closing ceremony after the STEM Bowl. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you there.
Gracias por la plática.
Gracias a ti. Gracias.
Una chela ahí, así que ten cuidado.
¿Cómo?
Va una chela ahí, así que ten cuidado.
Perfecto.
Está tú.